Okay, welcome to week 4. This week is all about compliance, regulatory, some federal and state funding topics that we'll talk about, as well as IP protection. I think this is really where we kind of deviate from the operational side of building a business, starting with how do we identify the problem and a solution and a customer, go to market, unique value propositions, unfair advantages, so on and so forth, and really talks about, okay, how are we going to protect our business from other people coming in trying to do the same thing we're doing. If we don't protect ourselves, then there's no infringement. They can do anything they want. But if we protect ourselves, then we have some legal standing to go take care of some business if we're starting to lose business because of that. Also, we have lots of steps and hoops we have to follow through if we're building something that is going to be interacting with a human that could be either life-saving or life-threatening, depending on its ability to perform the task it's meant to perform. And since these things are can be pervasive inside the human or have some sort of effect on that, obviously we want to have sort of regulations, and we've had so for the last several decades, manage that with the FDA process, the 510K process. So we're going to go through the 510K process, some federal programs, IP protection, and then I'm just going to go over what is homework for this week, which is the same as last week because I gave you 2 weeks, which is the 122nd kind of pitch. So we'll get started with the fun stuff with FDA, and there's all sorts of ways to think about the FDA. It's about half and half, or maybe 75-25. People have that love-hate relationship with them, and then there's that 25% just absolutely hates dealing with the FDA altogether, and it might be 75% when you really ask people in the process of the FDA. But I think most people like myself understand the process enough where it's not as intimidating as it could be. And then you also kind of figure out exactly why it's necessarily, especially if you get to the right type of applications. And then you also have to understand why they're putting you through that process. When you get through the clinical trials process, you have a product that's ready for market. You have all the data you need to show efficacy and everything else, and that all becomes marketing material. So the FDA process actually helps startups in many cases because it gives you that kind of, I don't want to say protected because anything can fall off and go awry, but you kind of in this protected space, if you will, where you're saying, I'm going to work on clinical trials. Your investors are not worried about market growth. They're more worried about how you're doing in the clinical trials because you can't have any market growth, can't even market your product yet. So when you're in that FDA process, that 510K process, a lot of times it gives you a sense or ability to really just focus on the science and the data and the product. And I think sometimes that's really beneficial for the life expectancy of a product and its ability to come to market. So here's the purpose of the FDA. This is one slide because we're going to not spend a lot of time on why it's there because there's no reason to kind of worry about that. It is what it is. We have to deal with it, and it's for good purposes. But the USDA, U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, is a regulatory agency within the Department of Health and Human Services. Their main function is to protect and to promote public health through the regulation and supervision of a wide range of products, again, established in 1976. So this is a large organization inside our federal government that specifically focuses on ensuring that products that come to market aren't going to hurt us. And that's whether it's a medical device and something physical, all the way to something that you eat every day. So these are the areas. So we just talked about that, food safety. So, the FDA approves most of the foods that go into the grocery store, not all the foods, but they do manage all that kind of stuff as far as it's saying what it's going to do and doesn't cause any harm, doesn't have anything that's illegal. We have several dyes that have just become illegal again in the last, or not again, for the first time in the last couple of months because of FDA guidance. We've had dyes in foods for decades that have been on the illegal list for FDA products. And that just means that the products that are in the market have followed that FDA process, have that FDA approval, and the ones that aren't and don't, you should stay away from. So sometimes you can have access to all those things. We all go into gas stations and see things that are not approved by the FDA. Their FDA is basically saying, eat that at your own risk at this point. Let somebody in here. So drug approval and monitoring, that's what we're going to talk about tonight, along with medical devices, but also cosmetics. We've seen this for a long time too, of how they actually bring cosmetics to market. It's a very similar way they bring a pharmaceutical to market or a medical device to market. It has to have to get certain levels of testing to ensure that it doesn't cause harm. In the earliest stages before the 70s, when the FDA didn't exist and there was no process, people could throw out there anything they want. And they did often, whether it caused you, a cream that caused you rashes when it was supposed to take care of a rash, things that were fatal just because they didn't go through the proper levels of testing. Tobacco products, for sure, always have been under these guidelines. Anything emitting radiation, which actually could be cell phones, could be Bluetooth devices of large scale. I mean, it could be any kind of radio frequency device also, or anything that's using telecommunications or a variety of different things in that regard. They could be emitting radiation, and that's something that's under their guidelines as well. And of course, every product that's in the veterinarian space is also governed and managed by the FDA for obvious reasons. And those veterinary products and the medical devices and drug approval monitoring, you'd be surprised how many times a company will actually go in the FDA for something that was going to be human-based and then pivot during testing with the animals because they have a product that works both in the veterinarian space and the human space. And getting a product to market in the veterinary space can be a lot quicker to start generating revenue while you're moving into the human-based clinical trials as well. So there's lots of ways to pivot. I know one company, Sweet Bio, that did that a couple of times back and forth between the veterinary side of things and the human side of things, and now they have two products that work in both markets. Okay, so important to start out. Regulatory compliance, it's vital. I mean, if you don't have regulatory compliance and you have a medical device or some sort of life science, or even it's agriculture or what have you, if you are in the United States and you don't go through the FDA 510K process, you're not going to get to market. If you do get to market, you can be closed down very, very quickly. And the amount of risk and exposure you'll have by trying to bring some product to market that's not approved by the FDA. I mean, this is like prison type stuff, right? Someone dies, someone gets hurt, the owner of that business is going to be liable for that, right? Because you didn't go through the right regulatory processes. Clear understanding the 510K process can accelerate time to market. You can really misunderstand the process and you can really understand the process. And like I said earlier, sometimes you go into things thinking it's going to be a 3-year clinical trial process, and it could be something where emergent use can be used, where disruptive technology can be used, which we'll talk about, but it expedites that process. But understanding the entire process can actually help you get to market faster. And non-compliance or failures of regulatory process can lead to reputational damage, recalls, legal consequences, and so forth, like I said earlier. And it will be directly on the person or the founder group that created this product and try to bring this product to market. Doesn't matter about LLCs and everything else. When health and wellness is on the line, the government will find a way to put you where you need to be if you made those things intentionally. I mean, look at Theranos. I mean, that's a great example. Theranos was lying to the FDA the whole time, could not generate the clinical trial data, and so on and so forth. And basically, everyone discovered her entire product was false. It didn't hurt anybody, but it was all based on fraud, right? And because of that, because it didn't go to clinical trials, but it was actually doing human testing with human tissue or human blood and so on and so forth, and actually, taking the test and putting on the process, the whole process affected humans in a variety of different ways. From a class perspective, when they discovered that it was all fraudulent, now she's in prison. Her business partners are going to be in prison if he's not already there too. And that's come the consequences that we're talking about with not going through this process. And they were just a small little startup that reached all the way to $9 billion, not real value, but based on fraud. And she's paying the consequences. So she really did kind of F around and find out about it. Okay, so let's go through the different medical device classes. And I work with companies that have all sets of these classes and directly on a couple of them. Class 1, this is the least pervasive, least kind of interactive with a human. It's not something that you will put in or on a body to keep the life of that body going. It's something that is in and around, but also might have interactions and needs to be tested just the same. This is usually the shortest of cycles. The clinical trials are easier if they are even required. You can also do things based off things that are already there. So Class 1, these are devices with the lowest risk. The FDA considers them to pose minimal potential harm to the user. General controls, so each one of the classes will have details and general controls. We'll talk about that in the next couple of slides, the differences. General controls cover provisions that relate to alteration, misbranding, device registration, listing, pre-market notification, on and on and on about the general controls. So you have to still be truth in advertising, truth in what you're saying. You have to have all your pre-market notifications and understand what is and what it isn't. But otherwise, it's a fairly easy thing to go through. So, I mean, a good example is latex gloves, elastic bandages. These are things that seemingly aren't going to cause harm to anybody, but as we discovered over the years, many people have allergies to latex, right? So that's when nitrile came out. But those are both still Class 1 products that you can buy on the market any day. You can buy latex or latex-free. You can buy powder or powder-free. These are all things that are general products that all have gone through a Class 1 510K process or FDA process, but did it very quickly because it was a minimal or lowest risk to the user when they're using the product. So most class 1 devices are exempt from pre-market notification. However, they must still comply with general controls. Okay, class 2, this is when we get a little bit more into the risk factor. This is at the level of moderate risk. These are things that will basically, work inside, or I'm sorry, outside of a human to keep them alive intentionally, but it's not something that's replacing an organ or something internalized. And these are powered wheelchairs or infusion pumps, so the things that are actually infusing drugs to you while you're in the hospital, the things that are outside, but even surgical drapes and other things that have to be either something related to the way they are sterilized and utilized that are going to affect if the product itself is utilized in an ER and OR, and if something goes wrong, the product itself could cause that. So I think sponges and drapes and things like that also that are around the hospital that also have to go through some sort of FDA review and approval as well. Class 2 devices typically require 510(k) submission unless exempted by special provisions. So that's when you go through this and say, hey, this is not going to have, this is the amount of impact we're talking about. These are predicate devices, meaning devices we've seen before. And so you can give them plenty of information to say, hey, this is just a one-off, or this is just an evolution, or something that's so similar to something else that we can base them on the same standards, have them apply to the same standards, but then also measure them against the efficacy and impact to the user in the same fashion. And the class 3 ones, these are the ones that are going to be the most extensive and take the longest through the FDA process. These are the ones, I'm going to jump to examples here, like heart valves, silicone gel breast implants, things that are implanted into the human body. These are different things that are really, really high risk of causing harm if they don't go, if something goes awry. And so therefore, they go through the highest level of scrutiny, highest level of monitoring, and highest level of testing through the process and data gathering process to get to the final end state where the FDA says, yes, you're cleared to go to market. So the class 3 are the most kind of internally pervasive and cause the most amount of potential risk to the end user. And that's why they go through the most level of process. Okay, there's a few different submission types. I think that I actually have 6 listed, but it might be 5. But anyway, the traditional is the easiest to explain. It's the traditional one where you go in there and you say, hey, my device is similar to this device. Let's go back to the latex and nitrile gloves. That's a class 2. I'm the inventor of the nitrile glove, and I'm going to go to the FDA and say, hey, my glove does everything that the latex glove does, except it doesn't cause adverse reactions to those that are allergic to latex. Ours is a non-allergenic or hypoallergenic type product, blah, 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 blah. So they go with a predicate saying that the latex gloves have already gone through decades of testing and use in the market, and all we're doing is changing the base foundational layer that is nitrile versus latex. And the only difference is that our product doesn't cause any allergy side effects or adverse reactions like latex does. And then they'd have to show the data that nitrile doesn't do that as well. And then once they get to that data, then they're free and clear. That might take a very short period of time for them to go through that process, right? But that's a very traditional thing. And a lot of times it's based on a predicate device, something that's previously cleared by the FDA or legally marketed before the 1976 establishment of the FDA. The focus is proving the new device is substantially equivalent, I love that, substantially equal to the predicate in terms of safety and efficacy. So it can't just be marginally equivalent, it needs to be substantially equivalent, 80%, 90% equivalent, right, for them to get to. If it's not that level, they're going to make you go through the whole process as it is on your own product with no predicate. The abbreviated, sometimes when you get special recognition for things you've done or things that are already part of a product that have been in the market, this method relies on the use of guidance documents, special controls, or recognized standards to facilitate the 510(k) process. So again, it's not necessarily about, well, it is about the predicate device, but it's also about the predicate information and other supporting information you have around that could cause you to have an abbreviated or shortened cycle with the FDA. Again, kind of rule of thumb is worst case scenario is 3 years. You might need 3 years of funding. Best case scenario could be as little as about 5 or 6 months, less than a year. It's not always the case, but when you have certain situations, it can happen rather rapidly. Instead of direct comparison with predicate device, the focus is on conformance with established standard or guidance, which can often expedite the review process. So if there's a lot of things out there that are already well-established guidelines in the open space, and your product can conform to those guidelines almost completely without any alteration, then you're going to get an abbreviated 510(k) process, and it's going to be shortened, and it could be as little as less than a year. Special 510K, these are where manufacturers wish to modify an existing device for which they have previously received 510K. So, and if it's a better heart pump or a better infusion pump, you can go in there and say, okay, these are all the things that were the same, and these are all the things that are modified. And so I want to test what are modified because I've already established everything that's the same. All the status quo items and features, they haven't changed. Here's the data to show that. Here's all the modifications. So I want you to test the modifications for this new release and can abbreviate the entire process as well. Modification must not affect the intended use of the device or its fundamental scientific technology. So it has to do basically the same thing, not basically, it has to do the exact same thing that the previous version did, but we're just modifying an existing device to move it forward. If it does something completely different, then it's a different device. I don't care if 90% of the components in that device are the same as something that's a predicate. If that 10% causes it to do something fundamentally different, then it's going to have to go through its own process. But if it's majority the similar like we already talked about, and you're just making some modifications with its intended use in scientific technology, basically the technology platform is basically the same, then you can get it abbreviated in kind of a special process, and it can be rather short to get to the FDA process if that's the case. But remember, you probably already went through a rather lengthy FDA process with version 1, and now you're just evolving the product and evolving your regulatory compliance as such. Okay, this is one of my favorites. I actually have a product that I'm working with a team of physicians on to measure capnography and pulse oximetry all in one device, connected through the mouth over the nose, and it collects express gas to do end-tidal CO2 and SpO2. So these two things, as well as pulse. So these three things are all going to be in this new device, and there's never been an ambulatory, meaning mobile capnography device outside the hospital. So we're applying for breakthrough device. And this can bite you sometimes and can make it work for you. It's basically saying you're the first to market. So unlike a predicate where you have something else already there and you can base on them off those baselines and guidelines, this one is something that's so revolutionary and breakthrough that the FDA is saying, hey, we could potentially want to rush this to market for a variety of reasons because it's such a breakthrough technology. There's all sorts of ways to get into this, and sometimes it does really bite you as well. If it's so breakthrough, then you are setting the status, you're setting the baseline with this breakthrough technology, so it can bite you in the other way as well. A program that expedites development and prioritization, or prioritizes the review of devices that provide for more effective treatment or diagnosis of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating diseases or conditions. So it also kind of has to do with something around what kind of impact it can make and how quickly it can make that impact. An emergency use authorization. This is what we saw in real form during the pandemic, and that's a lot of times when it comes into play. It's an authority that allows the FDA to help strengthen public health protections by facilitating the availability and use of medical countermeasures during public health emergencies. This can also be down to the patient level. If you have a very small group of patients that are suffering from a traumatic kind of illness, and there's no solution for it, there's no medication, there's no treatment plan, there's no therapeutics, yet you have one sometimes. And when I say sometimes, I'm not saying infrequently, I'm saying for the right reasons, frequently. These are allowed to happen if you're going to be able to prove in a small data set that you can impact that person's life dramatically. Another company I was working with has a product that potentially could do that. There was a doctor that found a couple of patients in their general area that both are suffering from the same ailment, and a company that was bringing a product to market, and they asked for special emergency use because these two people were basically heading towards hospice, to be able to do tests on these two patients together, initial data, and that was provided emergency use authorization by the FDA to do that. So this is a kind of a special time, and like I said, the big example is when we saw the several companies around the country that were giving emergency use authorization to create vaccines for the COVID, as well as manufacture those vaccines. Those vaccines came to market in as little as 10 months, which has never happened before for a pharmaceutical. That is usually a 3-year process at best. And so for somebody to go from concept to market in 11 months, that's incredible. And for a lot of us in this industry, it kind of proved what the FDA can do if needed. Of course, that was for a very big reason. It was a global pandemic, but at the same time, it kind of showed us all. It's like, okay, when does it really take 3 years? And what I mean that is like also the companies. How fast can you actually produce the data? The data has got to be good though, and it can't just be haphazardly captured or nor documented. But we're all hoping the process gets a little bit quicker going forward, although we haven't seen a lot of examples of that. So it is what it is. Okay, so the next several slides are just going over the process. And this is where one caveat I should give you is there are tons of state resources to help you with an understanding of the 510K process at a high level. We have accelerator programs in Memphis, Tennessee that will be launching in the 2024 season that specifically are a 12-week program that help companies get to and into an understanding, get to and into the 510K process, kind of prepping them up. And then consultants, there's lots of consultants in our mentor network that can help you. Really, it's also one of those get what you pay for. If you're going to put anything in your line items for an ask, hiring a very well experienced FDA consultant can be all the difference of how quickly you get into that process. And the one company I was talking about with the Capnography device, we hired a former assessor from the FDA. So his department was to actually be in charge of assessing the viability of breakthrough devices and other emergency uses and other things that are just going through the normal 510K process. So he was so well so great, had so much great knowledge about the entire process, and now he's on his own with his own consulting firm. That's who we went to, right? So here is a good time to kind of mention that this is not something you generally want to go to blind and by yourself, but there's lots of resources out there for you to tap into if you do have a product in the future or working on one of these to go through the FDA process. All right, so here's the process. It's a very high level overview, so I don't want to make it seem like it's easy, but it's easy to understand the overall process. How deep it gets, I'll show you where the areas of deepness really occur. So the first thing is just getting prepped, right? Determining if your device requires 510K process in the first place. And sometimes this can be a simple conversation with one of those consultants I talked about, just a couple hours describing what your product is. They can tell you what they think. They can tell you where it fits. They can tell you class 1, class 2, class 3. You can do some of the investigation yourself. But the idea here is just to determine if you even need to go through the 510K process. But let's say you do. Now find something else that's not like yours, but something that's gone through that process before that could be similar to yours. So predicate devices can help with abbreviating the entire processes. So looking for devices that are equivalent to product marketed before 1976 as well. Some low risk class 1 devices are exempted from the 510K process, and the FDA product classification database can assist in this determination. So you can go and look to see if something else is out there. Remember, a patent protects you from doing something that someone else is not, but a FDA process, two things that are almost similar or exactly the same can go through the FDA process at the same time. Look again at Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson and Moderna and everything else that all went through the FDA process in that 11 months with different forms of the mRNA virus for COVID. And they've done the same thing every time they've done a booster too. They have to go through the FDA process when they do a booster because that is a modification of the previous version. So these companies are all going through the same process with very similar products, each one of them patented separately, but same end result, but they all have to go through the FDA, right? So that's when I say looking at predicate devices, you can find other devices and not worry about protection in this regard. In fact, if you find another device and you're doing it better than them, and you've really improved and you have proprietary technology inside your device, but they've already gone through it and the end result and the effect is the same, then you can get through it very easily based on the information that they've already gathered through their process. So it can help by getting a full understanding of where your classifications are. Do you need to apply? Do you need to hire a consultant because it's very, very complex? And what's already out there that you can look at to say, hey, this makes me think I'm a class 1 or class 2, or maybe class 3. Okay, so then the next thing to do, and this is a big step between the last one and this one, because sending your 510K process to application to the FDA, you need to have a lot of details ready to go. Once it's determined the 510K is necessary, the next step is to submit other relevant data and documentation to the FDA. Get them to start understanding what you're asking for. They'll give you feedback, and sometimes it is very constructive, and other times it's not. The submission should demonstrate the device is substantially equivalent to a predicate. Information required includes device description, intended use, any data that you've gathered, any performance testing, clinical, or anything else. And if it's crucial to follow FDA's guidelines for format and content to avoid delays in processing. And again, that goes back to hiring someone. Like any other federal program, the more you do it aligned with their process and predicates of how they've taken submissions for the last 60 years, the better off you're going to be. If you start doing it rogue in your own way and document things in your own way, they're going to put you at the bottom of the stack, if they even look at you at all, because you're not following their process. So be very keen on the guidelines, format, and content to not cause you any undue delays. Okay, the FDA reviews your submission. So now that you've submitted it through the FDA, then they go through this review process. And this is where it can get lengthy. This is a minimum of a 2-month process, but generally it can be as much as 4 or 5 months. And when I say that, it doesn't mean that they go into a black box. You will hear from them, but they are also maybe asking for additional information. They're explaining their current status, but saying, hey, we need to see this. Or we're concerned about this. Sometimes they'll give you that feedback too. And if they get to a point where it's like not going to happen, they're going to let you know. But the FDA process for submission is when they're reviewing it to see how well you've done and what you got as material for them to review, and how well you will fit into their process as far as whether your device is properly classified, what type of submission is it going to be, so on and so forth. So the FDA aims to complete the 510 process in 90 days, so 3 months. But it can take longer. So that's what I was saying. I mean, it can be as little as 2 months. It depends on what it is and how busy they are. But 90 days is the general expectancy. But in reality, I'd say in 90 days to 6 months is really what you should expect for that initial review. So now you can start seeing that valley of death starting for startups. If you don't have the right amount of funding, I'm not saying you're sitting on your heels or your hands the whole period of time. You're obviously building other parts of your business, but a main part of your business is going through kind of a limbo state while you're waiting to hear from the FDA. So you need to make sure your funding can cover that. And your timeline is also aligned with the opportunity, or sorry, the reality of what the timeline actually could be. Okay, so once it's in the process, they have approved it for it to go through the process, then you'll have potential interactions between the FDA and the submitter. This is the feedback going back and forth. During the review process, the FDA might need further information, like I said. These interactions aimed at bridging any information gaps and ensuring. Every time I've gone through the FDA process, and it's usually I'm not the one directly interacting with the FDA, I still find that most of the time they're not necessarily out to show you where your failure points are because they want you to fail. They're showing you where the opportunities for failure could be so you don't fail. And I think that's pretty important to understand. And they're motivated to get things through the process well and remove and just and delete the process of the things that don't deserve to be there. So they take their time. I think that's pretty important. But there are interactions back and forth, and you need to be timely. You need to be a lot more timely than they are with you. If they take a month to ask you a question and you take a month to respond, then it's going to take at least a month for them to get to your response. That's already 2 months past when they sent it. I know everyone that I've ever worked with, when they hear from the FDA, it's all hands on deck. And the first thing they do is build a response, make sure it's an appropriate response, and send it back and wait for them to come back with more questions, or just say, yep, we got it. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you the next time we need some more information. So being rather rapid to respond to them is always going to be in your favor. Okay, so let's talk about what happens when clearance is rewarded. So you've gone through, let's say, a variety of interactions with them, and I haven't talked about clinical trials, but I am going to talk about that. But let's just say, jump forward and say, okay, everything's good. A year down the road or 3 years down the road, and clearance has been rewarded. What happens? Well, now you're able to market. This is the FDA saying you're cleared to start marketing your product. Doesn't necessarily mean your product is in its final state. There might be several months, several iterations of the product where it doesn't substantially change, because then you have to go back to the FDA. But you're doing other things in and around the product to deliver what the overall expectation is to your customer. That could be packaging, that could be labeling, that could be all the operations around delivering your product to market. But now you can actually start saying things about your product. Like, for example, we have products that we're working with that are pre-FDA. We can't put on the FDA on our website any information about what our product. We can't make promises. We can talk about what our product technology is supposed to do, but we can't make health outcome information available because it's conjecture at this point, hasn't been backed by data. And even when we get the data through clinical trials, the next stage of our process, we can't even market that until the FDA says that they agree that those tests were run in a valid fashion, that the data is showing efficacy and not hurting people and not harming people. It's got a low risk or no risk of hurting someone. Until they give that final stamp of approval, they don't want you marketing it. You should market it, because all you're doing is making promises before you're actually able to do so. So this reward is a big deal, because now you can go turn loose your sales department. You can turn loose your marketing department. You can build out the operations you need that you've been waiting to do. You can open up new markets anywhere you want within the FDA coverage area. So the idea here is like, yeah, you've got your handcuffs kind of removed and you can start marketing your product. It doesn't mean the FDA is fully approved, but the clearance is given for you to start marketing. They do have other parts of the process to actually give you the all-around approval. Like, for example, you have to go create a label probably, or most likely, and that label has to be approved. So there's some other things where you're cleared to start marketing, but you're not clear to put your product in the market just yet until you've gone through full FDA approval or gotten full FDA approval, which could be a subsequent process after you get your clearance, or it is a subsequent process. But it's not a lengthy one, not another 3 years of trials or anything like that. So startups can now commercially distribute their device in the US if it's fully approved. While they can market the device, they can't claim it's approved by the FDA. The correct terminology is FDA cleared. So they can go ahead and bring the product to market while they're waiting for that FDA approval. I made a little misstatement on that one part just a second ago, but the idea is that they can definitely start marketing and bringing that product to approval. They just can't say it's fully approved yet, which could cause people to not want to buy it. But then again, if there's a lot of people waiting for it, they're going to jump at the FDA approved process and just say, okay, it's FDA cleared, we'll give it a try. Those are your early adopters. That's still going back to that crossing the chasm image we talked about last week. Those are the ones who are going to be like, okay, I'm good with FDA cleared. I've been waiting for this product. A lot of physicians will be ready to go with the FDA cleared, even though it's not got full FDA approval. Okay, so some post-market requirements. So once you've gotten your clearance, rewarded, you're getting approved. Once the device is on the market, there are obligations the manufacturer must continue to meet to ensure ongoing compliance with the FDA regulations. You have to continue to monitor and report how your product is doing. Companies are required to report on the FDA any device-related deaths, serious injuries, and certain malfunctions. So you have to keep maintaining your product, and you have to keep maintaining the data and efficacy data of that product, and you have to submit that to the FDA, and the FDA can recall you. To tell you to recall your product if it's malfunctioning or causing harm. And you can think of a lot of things we've heard about recalling in the healthcare space. I mean, all the way going back to Tylenol in the 80s up until right now, having people potentially recall other medicines we've been taking for a long time that are just more like placebos than anything else. So false advertising type stuff that we're finding out in recent days or recent weeks. Establish registration and device listing. Manufacturers must register their establishment list of devices with the FDA and make sure it's usually done annually. So they want to know if the product is still on the market and still viable. Quality system regulations and medical device good manufacturing practices. So you need to make sure that your good manufacturing practices, your lab practices are all well established and approved. If you do have labs and clean rooms, the FDA is going to want to approve the labs and clean rooms. And you need to understand that that's all part of the FDA process because it's part about potentially manufacturing something that's also FDA approved. So a lot of parts of your operation might have to be part of the FDA process as well. Labeling requirements, we already talked about that. Device tracking, some high-risk devices must have a method for tracking them to ensure prompt action, like recalls or notices can be taken for safety reasons. Post-market surveillance, in some cases, the FDA requires companies to conduct post-market studies to monitor device once they have been on the market. So if the FDA gets a little squirrely about something, they might ask you to do a special monitoring process to monitor a certain period of time or a certain volume, what have you, because they want to get some data to see still again how if you still are showing the same efficacy that you've said you would, and you're not harming anybody. Okay, so next steps are startups with clearance. Start scaling. That's what I said earlier. Marketing and sales, gather real world data. So now it's not just about the scientific side of data, but it's how the product will actually interact with the customers. Explore additional markets and continuously monitor. That continuous monitoring is really to the benefit of you. It's not something the FDA is saying that you have to do because they care about your product as far as how much better it gets. And that's not why they're doing it. They're making sure it doesn't get worse. Or start delivering what wasn't expected or promised. But your continuous monitoring gives you the opportunity to continuously improve. Just understand that you might have an improvement that does have to go back to the FDA. So the next steps are really, taking the handcuffs of several different departments in the startups that have been waiting, or in most cases, not taking the handcuffs off. It's the CEO starting to hire the VP of sales, VP of business development. Hopefully they already had an operational person there, but maybe that as well. So a lot of times companies will just spend as little as they possibly can to get to the FDA process. And when I say little, that still can be hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. But operationally with their business, they won't spend a dime on growing their business through the entire FDA process. And that's advisable. The FDA process goes in a bad way and you don't get approval at the end. You're not laying off 40 people that you hired just waiting for the FDA approval. So the idea for the CEOs, they kind of have to measure risk versus reward to say, hey, these are the people I need right now, and these are the people I'm going to wait for FDA clearance or FDA approval for. And when I get to that point, I'm going to go raise some more money, or at least I have money already lined up for a tranche or a milestone. I'm going to use that money to go staff up. And I've seen lots of, most of the companies I work with, that's what they do. As soon as they get that inclination of getting that FDA clearance, they start doing the recruiting and fundraising and so on and so forth. All right, so what happens when you're denied? I mean, it seems a little obvious. You try again. They may not clear a device if it's determined that the device is not substantially equivalent or a legally marketed predicate, or if there are concerns about its safety and efficacy. So if they say something that, like, this is really hurting people, it could also be a product that is just hurting free people in its current form, right? So they're basically saying, look, we can't let you go forward because we're seeing too much negative data, and you're growing too substantially unequivalent or unequivalent to the predicate device. So we're going to need to stop you and allow you to come back with a better response on how to get back into the process, or to stop altogether. And certainly if you're harming things, harming people, harming animals, what have you, based on what your product is, veterinarian versus human sciences, they definitely want you to stop. Why would they want anybody to keep going? That doesn't mean that you have to stop as far as continuing to figure out what the problem is, correcting that problem and resubmitting. That's just why the process is there, is to kind of stop you in your tracks and say, hey, look, you got to go back to the drawing board. You got to stop doing what you're doing. But the trials need to stop. The impact needs to stop. So lack of sufficient data can be this case, device not being substantially equivalent, inadequate labeling, failure to comply with standards, or just harming people. These are the key points, but that gives you an opportunity to go correct. Okay, so take the feedback from the FDA. They're telling you why it failed. Consider how you can resubmit. Like I just said, pivot to a new product or strategy. If something's not working in the human trial space and you really think that it could work in the veterinary medicine space, then pivot. There's a good opportunity to do that. And that might be some of the feedback that you get from the FDA. Like, we're seeing really great data in the veterinarian space, but we're seeing marginally effective data, efficacy data with potential for risk data in the human trial space. So we're giving you that feedback. They're not telling you what to do, but as a CEO or founder, you option that off at that point to pivot and potentially go into that veterinary market while you're fixing things on the human side, and then resubmit for human trials as well. So explore alternative markets and seek expert guidance. I've said this several times. If you going into this without expert guidance and you get denied, there could be a lot of reasons to get denied that has nothing to do with your product. Going with an expert first to give you some initial guidelines and guidance is always helpful. Having someone after you've been denied is critical. They're going to help you understand what your current process is to get back into the submission process for the FDA. All right, so there's all sorts of clinical trials as well. And they go sometimes in order based on the impact to society, meaning that they're in the lab, then they go into animal trials, and they go into human trials. Just as everything was good with the lab, then they can go in the animals, and everything was good with the animals, then they go into humans, right? So that's the general process. So they have there's a variety of different phases, really. It's more what they are. So there's the preclinical trial phase. These are studies that occur before the clinical trials testing in humans can begin. These are often done in the research labs. They're done in vitro on test tubes and cell cultures, and in some cases in vivo, which is animal studies. That process can be sometimes rather short, meaning weeks to months of gathering data, because it's real easy to do. You're doing it inside of a fixed environment. You're doing it into a clean lab or a clean room, or you're working with a bunch of rats inside of one building. It's not like there's large scale clinical trials of the patients or the targets. So it can be very contained, and you can do all that up in front and do some preliminary testing that you can then go to the FDA and say, look, we've done preclinical trial testing, and this is the data we have. We'd like you to tell us what you think. Phase 0, exploratory studies, early clinical trials involving a very limited dose and a small number of patients. So this is usually only a sub-therapeutic type dose. So it's something that it's not even effective enough at what your prescribed dosage may be. It's something that they're just basically testing the smallest little bit, see if the smallest little bit will help you. It's kind of like taking your kid to the parking lot at the hospital and feeding them peanut butter when they're about 1 year old, just to see if they're allergic to peanut butter, right? It's a very small dose to kind of see if there's a reaction, and then taking measures of it. probably my analogy was not the best one, but you kind of get my point. It's the idea is like testing just enough to see if there's a negative reaction. If there's no negative reaction, we kind of keep it forward. If there's a major negative reaction, then we know we need to stop. So maybe the peanut butter child hospital scenario is a good example. Phase 1 trials. These trials test a drug device in a small group. This is 20 to 80 people, maybe 100. It depends. You're going to get guidance from the FDA. You're going to ask for how much you can do, meaning, hey, we'd like to do these 80 people, or we'd like to do these 100 people, and maybe we'd like to do 150 people in this first phase 1 trials. And the FDA feels like the data set that will result of that is reasonable for the request, then they'll grant it. For that capnography device, we're going to have a little over 100 people in the phase 1 trials, which start in about a month. So it's a small group. It is using more of the prescribed fashion of the product or the therapeutic. So it's not sub-therapeutic dosages, but it's on a very small, limited group of individuals. And again, it's after you've proven your in-lab, in vitro, or in vivo, your animal trial studies as well, if those are required. Ours is a class 2 device, so it doesn't require those. The animals, and we did do a lot of lab testing. Okay, phase 2 trials, the drug or device is tested in a larger group. This is 100 to 300 people. So each time they're kind of ratcheting it up. And then I'm just going to jump ahead to phase 3 trials, which is 1,000 to 3,000 people, or in some cases, it could be tens of thousands of people like they did with the mRNA virus vaccine, sorry. Each little layer here is to ensure that they're not harming a large group of people. So we start off with no people, then it's a very small group with a very small dose, then it's a larger group, continuously growing bigger and bigger. And the FDA can really keep saying, hey, we want to see more, right? We want to see more. We want to see these number of blinded studies with these number of target studies. And you have to go back and forth with them to figure out exactly what they're looking for and how much data you're going to provide, right? So there's not just like, oh, I've got to my 3,000th patient, it didn't kill anybody, and it's good. Or I got to my 3,000 patient and it only had adverse reactions with 2%. They might say we need to see another 2,000. With the mRNA virus, they saw tens of thousands in their beta trials, in their clinical trials, tens of thousands. And so there was a lot of non-anecdotal data before they got to the end review process, because it was based off of early preclinical trials, as well as phase 2 and phase 3 trials that were in smaller groups. But in that case, they were larger than we've seen in history, as far as number of people approved to be tested at these phases, phase 3 in particular. Phase 4 trials, these are post-market surveillance. These are studies that occur after the FDA has approved a drug. So this is something that's still in the market. So again, back to the mRNA vaccines, they have been studying those since they were all released in 2021. They have been looking at every single one of those data sets and hoping, I mean, really there's computers looking at those data sets, but what I'm saying is they've been maintaining surveillance. When I say maintaining surveillance and observation, I'm not just talking about the FDA. They're actually ensuring that the Pfizers and the Johnson Johnsons, the Modernas, and everything else, they're the ones doing it and submitting that to the FDA for their review. There's been billions of dosages out, and they're still looking at the data, because we don't know, no conspiracy theories, not going down any rabbit holes here. We don't know the long-term effects of the vaccines. We can suspect, we can look at the data, and the data is promising in so many ways. We also need to continue to look at the effects long-term, right? So nothing short-term about the FDA. You might get the initial clearance, but you're going to have a relationship with the FDA for the rest of the product's life, no doubt, forever. As long as your product's in the market, you have a product that is involved with the FDA. Okay, so I'm going to keep muscling through the last part of this, but I do want to stop here just to see if there's any questions, because we were covering kind of more regulatory FDA type stuff.
Hi, yeah, so I do have like a little question regarding how are let's say for our case, not for our case, but like a clinical trial will be performed under FDA, because coming from the academia side, I don't think any of the government funded researchers or like the RBs that have been approved under those fundings can any of the trials can go towards for like a FDA trial. So in case of if there's like a company, how, like what kind of trials does it have to apply for in order to conduct those trials, I guess?
I think I might understand the question. I mean, let me try to respond and you tell me if I'm in the right direction, going in the right direction. First of all, going back to the base advice I got of talking with an expert, trying to figure out what the best way to apply, level of application, submission type, submission window, and what data you need to go to the FDA with. Then also working with an individual to understand what type of clinical trials the FDA is asking of you. So a lot of times they'll say, you'll get feedback that these are the level of trials that you'll have to complete with data sets with this level of data in order for us to get our attention, for us to review and approve. And then there's also a lot of opportunities sometimes where people don't actually have the ability to do the clinical trials. And that's when you have to partner with other entities. And a lot of times this is kind of this relationship we're talking about right now in this whole program, where if I was a startup and I had a product that I was thinking that could come to market, I would want to, let's say it's a healthcare product, and I want to work with the University of Memphis team who's looking at that could actually generate research around my product, so I can get some funding then to go actually hire a clinical trial team and actually do that clinical trial. A clinical trial might be with a partner at St. Jude Hospital. It might be with a partner at any other healthcare facility. It might be a partner at UT Knoxville, right? Or Oak Ridge National Laboratories. It could be a variety of things where the facilitation of the trial is done by a partner and you're collecting the data and then submitting that to the FDA. So there's a variety of ways to kind of slice that. And the best way to understand it is to hire someone who's an expert in that field.
I see. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, so let's jump into funding side of things. This is not investment. This is still related to kind of some federal type level funding programs that are very aligned, not with the FDA, but with other scientific organizations that is part of the federal government, in particular the National Science Foundation. There's two types of business, SBA, National Science Foundation type business loans and business grants they can give there. Certainly there's a lot with the Small Business Administration. But the National Science Foundation has some very unique ones called SBIR and STR. The SBIR is for small business innovation research, and the next other one is about technology transfer, and I have another slide after this one. A government program that provides funding to small businesses to conduct innovative research that has the potential for commercialization. And it's usually a smaller businesses. This is not for well-established businesses. They can afford their own innovation departments. This is for startups. This is for smaller businesses. Grants are provided to support early stage research and development, and businesses maintain all the intellectual property rights. What I love about this whole SBIR, STR thing is, and I'm going to go to the STR one too, is the fact that you can work with the National Science Foundation and get millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands to start off with, and up to over millions of dollars worth of support from the National Science Foundation that can be matched with VCs, matched with matching programs that I'll talk to you about here in a second. And what happens when you're going through this process is you haven't gone out to a VC to ask for, let's say, $1 million. And because if you did pre-FDA, pre-clinical trial, there's not a lot of VCs that are going to invest in early stage life sciences companies because you really haven't proven anything yet. But one way to go through that is to apply for the National Science Foundation. They have 41 different technology areas, and each one of those technology areas is led by a program director. And that program director acts more like a VC partner than anything else that I can describe. They're very motivated to find what they call disruptive and innovative products. So they want things that disrupt current or existing or entrenched technologies. When they find the products they like, they really are your champion, helping you through the rest of the process too. To apply to get into this consideration is a bit difficult, and I do recommend hiring an expert or engaging a mentor that has good experience in this regard. But you can submit something, and if they deny that application, then you can't submit that same thing again. So unlike the FDA process where you can keep filing and keep asking for to be submitted in or approved in the process, with the National Science Foundation, sometimes it's one and done. And if they've looked at the technology, you don't think the technology is disruptive enough, doesn't matter how pretty you can make your PowerPoint deck afterwards, they're not going to want to look at it. So it is a harder thing to get into, but I know companies that do it every day. And I know a lot of companies who get a lot of matching dollars from both VCs, direct matching money, as well as programs, which Launch Tennessee has one in the state of Tennessee, to help match what you're being given from the National Science Foundation. And so what this does is allow you to kind of generate a lot of early investment without giving any equity away, and then de-risk the entire process for later stage investors who are less likely to go on the first time pre-seed, but are much more likely to go on and go, hey, well, you've worked with a year with National Science Foundation, you got their vote of approval, and you've done a lot in this last year, and you've generated this amount of funding for them, and the cap table looks great. And okay, now I'm ready to write you $1 million check, because I'm no longer the first person that had to write a check and the riskiest part. So the SDR and SBIR funds are really can be very beneficial to startups in this space. So the SDR, similar to SBIR, requires formal collaboration between a small business and a research institution. So, this is what we were just talking about, a partnership between two entities, a startup and a university. So the SDR program is to help with technology transfer and in the university space, and also matchmaking between universities and startups and so on and so forth. Minimum of 40% of the work must be done by the small business and a minimum of 30% by the research institution. Unlike the SBIR, which is 100% by the startup, they do have restrictions on what you can say and market before you get to the process. I've gone through several of these phases. They're actually very beneficial and mostly very educational as well. Having gone through it a few times, I'm not sure I'm learning much the next time, but now I'm acting as an industry mentor as opposed to a PI or someone that was going through it firsthand. So I'm there just to help the startups anyway. So it's not on me. A lot of customer discovery is done through these phases, and I think that's one of the things why I like it the most. Okay, key features of the National Foundations. So broad topics, unlike other agencies, the NSF doesn't specify narrow topics but instead has broader areas of interest. These are 41 different areas of last count, and they range from electrification to healthcare to agricultural to AI to machine learning and stuff like that. They're all across the board and really kind of broad terms. They are really interested in big kind of moonshot disruptive technology. So they don't want to pigeonhole you into smaller niches. That's why they keep them a little bit more broader. Phase one feasibility study, you can get up to $256,000 through this. These are their boot camps in phase one. Phase two, further research and development, you can get up to $1 million for that, and that's partly matching, partly direct. You can be in that program for up to 2 years. And phase three, commercialization, that's where you start taking on non-SBR, STR funds. This is from the private investors. There's a lot of high risk, high reward. The NSF looks for projects that, if successful, will have significant commercial or societal impact. And it's all based on I-Core. I-Core is what I've grown up with, understanding how to do the process, and what you've learned to date is all based on I-Core. It's all about customer discovery. And so everything you go through when you go through the training for this, you're learning the I-Core way of doing things, which you've already had exposure with during this cohort, because that's what mine's based on as well. Okay, so where does Launch Tennessee and Tennessee come in to help? Well, we match. In fact, there's two things. One is you can get a grant, a micro grant for I think it's $4,000 to help you with the initial process. You can utilize that to go hire an expert to give you some advice. You can use that process to fund the creation of the application for submission, however you want it. So it's a kind of a micro grant that you're granted just by applying, getting approved to Launch Tennessee to consider an SBIR or STTR grant from the National Science Foundation. Then beyond that, they do matching programs. So if you go get $250,000 from National Science Foundation in phase two, or phase one, they'll give you a matching of $250,000, because we have funds in our federal budget and our state budget that are directly related to these two things, SBIR and STTR, in order for us to continue to hedge the bet for these startups. So we're not just giving, the money's not just coming from National Science Foundation. Launch Tennessee and the state of Tennessee is standing at the plate, ready to match those funds to really maximize the opportunity. So that's when, and a lot of states do this. I just know of the several states I work with, Tennessee has got the most extensive funds to match these SBIR and STR. So I recommend this being step one of any company, even before, or certainly as a delayed parallel to the FDA process. And it can help you do, one can help you do the other. Okay, let's just jump through IP protection real quick, and we'll be able to kind of probably sum this up in the next 15-20 minutes, and then we can depart after we talk about homework or do some question and answer. I'll leave it up to y'all. Okay, so IP protection. We talked about a moat, and I think, James, you brought that word up as well, and I like that word a lot. We use that word a lot. The idea is what you're utilizing to protect your business, right? And that is intellectual property protection, and there's a lot of different types of that. Some are simple, some are easy, some are quick, and some are much more extensive and take a lot of time and effort to maintain and litigate against. So what is IP protection? Is there any legal measure that are safeguard the exclusive rights of creators or owners of the tangible creations of the mind, such as inventions, literary? You can read on. Basically, it's your intellectual property. So I'll give you some kind of at least one good example of, I think, a way to think of intellectual property. During the Grammy Awards in 2020, maybe around there, Bradley Cooper grabbed Ellen DeGeneres' cell phone and took a group shot of 15 people, all celebrities at the Grammys, just a big old shot, right? It was taken on Ellen DeGeneres' phone by Bradley Cooper. I'm not going to ask the question because everyone's on mute, but if I were to ask the question, who do you think owns intellectual property? Most people would be saying, and this is what I've heard from asking this question, that Ellen DeGeneres does, because the item, the product, the technology that captured the content was done on her phone, and she owns that phone, so she owns that copyright. Couldn't be furthest from the truth. Bradley Cooper actually owns intellectual property. It's the person who framed and took the picture of the content that owned that intellectual property, the same way any other photographer would own it if they took it on their own camera. Doesn't matter who owns the camera necessarily, unless there's other legal obligations, but it doesn't necessarily matter who owns the capture device. It's really who took the content, created the content, and that in this case it was Bradley Cooper, right? So now, not that anybody's going to go and say, okay, well, I'm going to go get intellectual property and copyright on that picture, but it just gives you an example of how content is created and who actually is the owner of that content. There's certainly lots of different things that can restrict that. Like I have, one might have extending circumstances and agreements in place that says this is my corporate laptop, and if I use the laptop to do anything, everything on that laptop is owned by the corporation, right? So even though I'm creating it on this laptop, there's a policy that I've signed that says anything I create on that tool is owned by the institution, right? So there's ways around those restrictions, or there's ways for those restrictions to occur that the larger entity owns the intellectual property as well, but in generally it's who creates owns. Okay, so some of these most basic things are trademarks. These are legal protections for words, phrases, symbols, logos. I mean, and they run the gambit. Like Coke doesn't have one trademark. They have dozens and dozens of trademarks. They have Coke, they have Coca-Cola, they have the swoop, they have without the swoop, they have red, they have black, they have all different types of treatments of their logo, typeface, and everything else with different colors, and they've trademarked each and every one of those, right? Same with McDonald's, Burger King, anything you can think of that has a brand to it has gone through and applied for a trademark. And the only reason that they do that is to lock everyone else from doing that. Good example of a bad idea is, and I still refuse to call it anything other than Twitter, because the last time I used it was Twitter, and then I deleted it from my phone in my life. But this new product called X, right? Well, Elon Musk has been wanting to have a product and a platform under the X moniker for 30 years. He's tried before PayPal. X.com was something. He actually managed to buy a URL at X.com before anyone else did. And that's been his goal. Now, that's all well and good, but you took a 14-year company and that had entrenched itself around the globe. It's not just to be a communication device, but in some countries, the only form of communication between their citizens and access to local news and rapid information delivery. And you not only did a lot of other things to damage the company, but you changed the brand that was so entrenched, to something that is unbrandable. He cannot get trademarks on the letter X. They just can't do it. Now he can come up with a unique logo that uses the X, but he's not patenting or trademarking the X. He's trademarking the way the logo looks, right? And and there's Xboxes uses X in their logo. A lot of Xfinity uses X in their logo. So I mean, it was really a bad decision, right? Just based on something he's always wanted to do, and since he's the top dog there, he can do it. But from a marketing perspective, it's horrible. But and it kind of restricted them from being able to even protect. I mean, Twitter, they had every form of the word Twitter protected, every color, every variation, and including the word Twitter. No one can go start a company or even say things like that by the name Twitter. I mean, they can go buy the trademarks now, although Elon does own all those trademarks still. Okay, so copyrights, legal protection for original works of authorship, such as paintings, pictures, digital renderings, books, music, codes, also software, right? So you can copyright your code. And I highly recommend every software company in the world that I'm talking to definitely copyright their software and use that as level protection. It's not the ultimate level protection. In fact, they only look at the first several thousand lines of code and the last 1,000 lines of code or something to that extent. I forgot what it is, and it's been a long time since I've applied for a software copyright, but they don't look at the million lines of code. They're really looking at segments of code to make sure that it's the same copyright version as they have, and that's kind of protected. But the idea here is like it's really wise to protect anything through a simple copyright. And these aren't very expensive things. You can get trademarks and copyrights for less than a couple $100. And you can apply for them yourselves as well through the uspto.gov. All right, patents. 3 main types: utility, design, and plant patents. There are other forms, and I won't go into those as well, but these are the main types. The most common types of patent covering new and useful processes, machines, articles, and manufacture. These are utility patents. I saw an application the other day that the person that was reading the patent was very upset because they were saying, well, they can't patent a camera. They can't patent the camera taking a picture. They can't tap the camera using software. And it's like, they're not patenting any of those things. They're patenting the application of those technologies in a very unique way, because the phone is taking a picture of a piece of furniture. The piece of furniture is then being scanned, and then inventory is created from that, right? So although I'm encouraging the founder to go find a different way because he has some good ideas, this patent was pretty good. I'm not a patent attorney. I would have a patent attorney look at it. But the idea for that is that you have one founder who's got an idea that had no idea the patent existed, but came up with a very similar idea using AI and technology and everything else. So that goes to show you that ideas are not very unique in general. For patents, it's the first to file, not the first to invent. So I could have invented something 10 years ago, but if I didn't file till yesterday and someone either heard me, stole my stuff, or came up with the same idea, more likely 2 weeks ago and filed for their patent, guess who's going to get it if it gets approved? If it gets approved and they started it 2 weeks before I did, they're going to get it no matter if I have documentation going back 10 years saying I invented it. It's first to file, not first to invent. That was changed in 98. So there's a lot of things that you got to understand about patents, that it can both be good for you and be bad for you. If you have more than 30% overlap, then you're not going to get your patent. But if you have less than 30% as a general rule, you could probably get your patent because 70% of it is distinctly different from something else. Patents can also be a double-edged sword. If I have to put a patent out there, I have to put exactly how I'm doing it, which means I've just told everyone exactly how I'm doing it, which means everyone can go then do it a different way, right? So a lot of times people won't do patents because they don't want to publish how they're doing things. They'd rather go with trade secrets or another process. So patents can be hardware, software. Design patents can be paintings and architectural designs and a lot of things that are the ornamental design of things. And then plant patents are actually hybrids of roses and different flowers or seeds or things that are plant-based. So there is a specific patent just for plants. I like trade secrets because I think this gives you a different level of protection, legal protection from confidential information that gives a business a competitive advantage, such as formulas, recipes, or customer lists. I'm not putting it out there saying that this is how I'm doing something, but I am saying I'm protecting this through legal measures, and I utilize NDAs and confidentiality agreements and a variety of different tools to control my trade secrets. And these don't have to be about the product. They can be a client list, like it says at the end. That can be a trade secret. If I'm at one law firm and I leave and take the client list with me to another law firm, breaking my NDA or confidentiality agreement, the law firm I'm stealing from, can sue for a large level scale of damages to the firm I'm going to, because I stole something that was a trade secret, their customer list. Now, I can go look at publicly and see a lot of companies that have information that could say who their lawyer of record, attorney of record is. I can go do that publicly. But in this case, in this scenario, it's not just stealing who is working for who, it's phone numbers, it's who the contact people are, maybe it's documentation of prior events. All of that is very proprietary and included in trade secrets for a company wanting to protect their internal workings and products. Plant variety protection, plant variety legal protection for new varieties of plants is easy. And okay, that one's easy. So I wanted to talk to another type of thing that I didn't include in here, but I will. There's certain types of trademarks and everything else where people can actually, like John Deere tractors. Nobody can manufacture a tractor that looks like John Deere. They can manufacture a tractor that works just like the tractor that John Deere does, but they can't make it green and yellow. in the same way. They can't use that green and that yellow. Tiffany blue, Miami blue, all these companies, businesses, teams, they will actually trademark their variation of the color as well. And those all become distinct products of theirs that they can protect, right? So John Deere green and gold is protected from any other manufacturer of those similar products globally because they own all the intellectual property rights to those colors and to that treatment of those colors in their brand. So I want to give you another example of a way to trademark. Okay, non-disclosure agreements. I think we're coming to the end here. Non-disclosure agreements, they're both good and bad. I generally don't sign non-disclosure agreements if I can help it, because it restricts me from helping who I'm signing it with more than likely. If I was two businesses and I wanted to build a relationship between each other and I had somewhat competing products, but mostly products that would fit well together, I would sign a mutual NDA, meaning I want to share information with another company and I want them to share information with me so we can make an assessment whether we're going to do business together, right? Those are when NDAs are really important because you're around a very specific event. You can actually even probably measure damages, but that is also the flaw of NDA. Generally, they're hard to litigate because you can't really measure damages, especially NDAs related to startups. And startup founders are the ones who really want the NDA signed the most because they think they're protecting their business by signing the NDA. But if you're coming at me with an NDA and you're not willing to tell me everything about your company, and that's okay. I'm fine with that. I have great relationships with people that are like, Brian, I don't want to give you that information. I'm not asking for it. It's fine with me, but you don't get any coaching, mentorship, and advice either because I don't know about your business. You won't tell me about your business, right? If you just give me the high level, I can only give you the high level. Also, when I sign NDAs, it restricts me from going to talk to other people on their behalf, which I might be either doing to help them, right? So there can be NDAs that help and NDAs that hurt. In general, from a startup perspective, I think NDAs are very more harmful than good. And this last part is really makes them kind of toothless, which is if I'm a startup and I say my company's worth $40 million, the only one that's going to believe me is me, right? I'm a startup with a concept. I'm not in FDA yet. I don't have any customers. I only have 2 people that are working for me. There's no way my product's worth $40 million, right? And it's in state, it might be worth $400 million. You might be a $4 billion business and it's in state. But when you're at the concept stage, early stage startup, you're worth really nothing. Okay. You have to set an evaluation, but that's also saying someone's going to write you a check for that whole amount right now for your business. And sometimes it happens, but rarely. Most of the time, people are wanting to use that valuation to write you investment to know how much percentage they're willing to take, as much correlated to how much risk they're willing to take to invest in you at the early stage. And if I'm sitting there as an early stage startup person, I'm having everyone sign NDAs, I'm continuously blocking my wall, building walls around me that are going to restrict people from helping me more times than not. So it may not make sense what I'm saying, but from experience, I can tell you, and a lot of people in my industry and my side of things, we're not discouraging NDAs because we want to find out all about your ideas. We're discouraging NDAs because it restricts us from doing anything that really supports you and helps you. And the biggest thing to know is an idea is not unique. There are 8 billion people in this world. If one thinks that they can come up with an idea that not a single other person on this planet could think of, then that is the 51st bias on this 50 cognitive bias we talked about a couple of weeks ago. That is the worst case of Dunning-Kruger, or the worst case of confirmational bias, everything you want to think of, when I can think of that I'm the only person that can think of something. That's not the case. In fact, there's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people that come up with the same idea everybody else has. It's all about who's going to execute on it, who's going to get the funding, timing, go-to-market strategies, the team that you hire. All sorts of factors are going to come into play. The idea is not one. The idea is just the brain fart that started it all, and to put it in crass terms, but in real terms. So ideas are not unique. How you protect your business can be the best route for you to get to the market and out execute. And I think that's what I'm trying to tell you is utilize these tools to help facilitate your execution. So your execution is better than your competitors and your customers like you more than they like them. That's the best way to protect your business. Of course, patents are important, trademarks are important, copyright's important. These are all going to keep the sharks at bay. But ultimately, execution and having a strong customer base is going to keep you in the profit that you can continue to grow your company. Okay, so that's it for the long regulatory drawn on kind of lecture around federal programs and regulatory and everything else. You're halfway through your 2-week process to come up with I'm hoping a fairly robust 120-second kind of pitch. Please include problem, customer, solution, unique value proposition, and your kind of overall go-to-market strategy. Next week, we're going to talk about finances and try to work a little bit on understanding the market opportunity, so we can kind of build a financial statement of sorts to put in our deck. And then we're going to start building the pitch the week after that. Next week, we're going to have a guest speaker, Jennifer Zachary from Orion Therapeutics, former alumni who is now a co-founder at the company that started based on this program, not because of us. They were already planning on becoming a business, but she joined that business and helped them get to a certain level of awareness and understand and kind of investment to able to pitch their business based on what she did in the Scipreneur challenge. And then she became a co-founder, but I'm not going to steal all our thunder. She's going to come next week and give us a 30 or 40-minute conversation and an active one. So please come with questions, because she's been in the same shoes y'all are in, right before she defended her thesis and became a co-founder of this startup. So it's a really exciting kind of story. I'm looking forward to it. All right, other than that, that's the session for tonight. Again, we have office hours available tomorrow afternoon. If you need anything, you should be working on your problem and solution statements. I'm going to send an email out to everybody saying, hey, this week was a little light. We need to make sure we get everybody back on the schedule for next week. I'll upload the YouTube video tomorrow once it's rendered. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. We can open it up right now if you have any right now. Okay, great. Everybody have a great evening. Have a great week. Rest of your week, great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.